So I'm going to try to do several things tonight, but mainly I want to bring you up to date on some events connected with the Dead Sea Scrolls which have happened fairly recently and in fact are happening as we sit here tonight. Now, one of the things that has happened in the last year and a half is that Mark and Becky Lanier have gotten behind the publication of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that's a major event and promises to be very influential on the publication of the scrolls over the next years. But another thing that's been happening during the past couple of years is signified by the fact that tonight, as we sit here, about 4 hours away driving in Dallas-Fort Worth, there are 8 fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls locked in a safe at the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. In Oklahoma City tonight, there are another 8 fragments locked in a safe at the headquarters of Hobby Lobby. That's true. 50 miles north of Oslo, Norway, on a very deserted farm, desolate I should say maybe, there are another 30 fragments of Dead Sea Scrolls locked in a safe. On the campus of Azusa Pacific University in Los Angeles, there are 5 more fragments locked in the rare book room of the library. And in Zurich, Switzerland, in a bank vault, there are an unknown number of Dead Sea Scrolls fragments locked in a safe. Now you have to ask, how has all this happened? I just mentioned more than 50 fragments of Dead Sea Scrolls that were unknown less than a decade ago, and many of them unknown 2 years ago, and still a group in Zurich in a vault, and we don't know how many are there. I've seen photographs of a lot of them. I've seen partial photographs of a lot of them. I've gotten descriptions. I sat with William Kondo just a week ago, Tuesday, in Jerusalem, and he described to me some of the fragments that he still has in the vault. But the question is, and here's what I'd like you to join me in thinking about tonight. How did that happen? How did that happen? And we won't know for, who knows, maybe years, how many more fragments are going to come out. Well, what I'd like to do tonight is kind of initiate you into this clandestine world of antiquities dealers through which the Dead Sea Scrolls fragments have come over the past 60 years. And I'd like to show you some photographs, some of which have not been published before, so I know that you haven't seen them. Some I just recently got. I have, by the way, for the next volume, I'm going to have a lot of unpublished photographs because a week ago yesterday, I was in Paris at the home of Jolanta Milik, the wife of the famous scroll scholar, Joseph Milik, and I've known her for a long time, but she brought out 2 big boxes of photographs, black and white photographs from the 50s and 60s that have never been published. And, you know, I've known her for a long time, but she never offered these photographs. But the thing was, she was hunting for a fragment of a 13th century Samaritan Pentateuch piece that she thought maybe was hidden down in the bottom of one of these boxes. We never did find that, but at least I found these photographs. Anyway, I'd like to show you some photographs tonight. And then I want to try to help you understand how it is that among the fragments that are in this vault in Zurich, Switzerland, There is a piece of Genesis that's about like this. It's 3 columns, 22 lines to the column. It's Genesis 37, and the new lowered sale price, lowered from 50 million to 42 million, is all you need to spend to get that. I'm serious. $42 million is the asking price. How is it that now, today, a fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls of that size and that value is still sitting in the vault in Zurich? Well, let's review just a moment how the first scrolls were discovered, how they came in to scholars, to the museum, to the Department of Antiquities of Jordan, and also eventually to Israel and the Israel Museum, the Shrine of the Book, and remind ourselves a little bit, for those of you who are not scroll scholars or archaeologists, what the scrolls are all about, and then we'll try to figure out how it is that this big piece of Genesis is still in Zurich. And I think I've got it pretty much figured out. It's taken me a while. Well, for those of you who haven't been to Israel, what we have here is a photograph of the Qumran Plateau. I like this photograph because it shows you how close Jordan is. That's the Dead Sea. In the distance is Jordan. We're standing in what is now Israel. It's very close. It used to be closer too before 1993 when they were still at war. It was very, very close. Well, that's the general area where the scrolls were found, both north and south of that area. And whoops, there we go. This is a photograph of the mouth of Cave 1, where the first scrolls were discovered, or perhaps, as I discuss in my book, one of the Cave 1s. That's still not totally decided, but you can read what I have to say about the possibilities. This was at least one of the first caves. And you can see again, very faintly in the back, there's Jordan. This is the most famous of the caves at Qumran. It's Cave 4. It's actually Cave 4A, because there's a Cave 4B behind that. It's possible to climb into that cave, either from the top or from below. If you do it from the top, you have to wait till the guards are gone, or get there before they wake up. If you do it from below, you can do it probably in the middle of the day if there aren't too many tour guides around saying that you shouldn't be doing it. But that's where more than half of all the scroll fragments that were discovered at Qumran were found. Cave 4 was discovered in 1952, and then in 1956, Cave 11. This is the outside of Cave 11. Inside, it looks like that. It was a naturally recurring cave. And basically, by the time the archaeologists got there, by the time Father DeVoe got there, there was nothing left. The Bedouin had already taken everything, whereas in Cave 4, the archaeologists were able to find some things, and also in Cave 1. Now, we won't go into the details, of course we don't have time tonight, of all these discoveries, but I did want to remind you that there were other places besides Qumran. And one of those other places is Wadi Murbat, which is south of Qumran along the Dead Sea, inland a little bit, that is to the west a bit. And this was discovered in 1951. Some naturally recurring caves, a huge amount of things there that have been ignored too often sometimes, probably because they were originally published in French. Well, that's one of the reasons, not the only reason. But then also, there were scrolls discovered on top of Masada. Many of you will know the story of Masada, the Jewish last stand there in 73. But there were Dead Sea Scrolls found there. Some of them are without a doubt related to scrolls at Qumran. And we want to ask just a few questions to kind of get you into the whole matter of Dead Sea Scrolls and why they're important. We don't have time to get into detail. If you want to get into detail, there are about 3 or 4 of these esteemed colleagues of mine who teach classes for whole semesters or whole years in Dead Sea Scrolls. But let's ask ourselves, first of all, what is the content of the Dead Sea Scrolls? In them, and here is one of the reasons they're so important, we find copies of parts of every book of the Hebrew Bible, or what many of us call the Old Testament, except for the book of Esther. But even Esther, actually, is possibly mentioned in a certain way among the scrolls. Last Friday, when I was with Yolanta Millick, one of the things we were doing was going through the papers of Joseph Millick, which were left behind that never got published. So we went to a Dominican monastery in Paris and spent the day there with Florentino Garcia Martinez, famous scroll scholar, whose library actually is over here in the Lanier Library. I guess it's over there. So Florentino and Yolanta Millick and I spent the day going through these boxes. And in there, we came across a whole handwritten paper on this question of whether Esther is among the Dead Sea Scrolls, his notes on Proto-Esther. We're hoping to publish some of that in a new series that I'll tell you about in a few moments. But the scrolls have all parts of all of the books of the Hebrew Bible. Then there are commentaries on some books of the Old Testament or Hebrew. I say Old Testament because many of you will be more used to that, although among scholars we usually say Hebrew Bible. Now in the library over here, if you haven't been there yet, you have a fantastic opportunity to see the best facsimiles ever made of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Mark has bought a set of 3 large ones and then 3 other smaller ones from Jordan. And among those, you have the Isaiah scroll, so that represents Scripture. It's the largest one, 24 feet long, complete. And then there is one of these commentaries. It's called the Habakkuk Pesher, which means a commentary on the book of Habakkuk. And there were a series of these commentaries at Qumran. The interesting thing to me about the Pesharim, the commentaries, is the methodology, especially the way that they read Scripture in terms of events that recently happened, are presently happening, and are about to happen in the future soon, which is actually the way a lot of us read Scripture today, isn't it? We always try to read it in terms of what's happening to us, which may be actually a bit selfish and may not be the best way always to interpret Scripture, but it's what we like to do, and they like to do that also at Qumran. Then there are paraphrases of some books of the Old Testament. These are also quite interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I thought, I sit down and read the Genesis Apocryphon again. It's like a paraphrase of part of the book of Genesis, which I did. And I saw again something that I've mentioned in other talks, how when they came to the story of Abraham and Sarah in the book of Genesis, and you remember the incident where Abraham and Sarah went down to Egypt, and Pharaoh saw Sarah, and he thought she was so beautiful that he just stole Abraham's wife. Pharaohs could do that in those days. And so the Genesis Apocryphon goes on to explain what, you kind of wonder when something like that happens. Well, what was so beautiful about her, especially given her advanced age? She was around 90 years old. So, why was Pharaoh trying to steal her? And it's really nice how the Genesis Apocryphon, this Dead Sea Scroll, goes down through and actually describes her from head to foot and tells you what it was about her that was so beautiful. That's the sort of thing that these paraphrases of the Old Testament will do sometimes. They give you all the details that you always wondered about, you know, but aren't there. Now, the documents were written not completely, but in large part, by whatever group lived at Qumran, or in the case of other places like Wadi Murbat, groups that were hiding there, or Masada groups that were hiding there. But who was this group at Qumran? Well, everyone is still arguing about it. From the beginning, many scholars thought they were Essenes, which is a known Jewish group described by Josephus and a few other ancient writers. My own professor at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Shmaryahu Talmon, did not like the Essene identification. He said, look, they call themselves, you know, Hayachad, which means something like the group. So what's this about Essenes? And I remember the night that I gave him his copy of my first book of history on the scrolls. And he just thumbed through it, and he saw the word Essenes in as a chapter head, and he said, oh, the Essenes again. So there are lots of scholars that don't like that identification, but it is possibly an identification of the group that wrote a lot of these documents, and they wrote them in some cases for their own community. Obviously, if you have a community, you have to have some regulations or rules, and so they came up with some regulations. The 613 commandments in the Old Testament law were not enough. We had to add some more. And they had documents called, for example, the Manual of Discipline. Maybe not the best title, but a series of rules. And a number of other documents, both about their outlook on the world, about their outlook as far as the calendar was concerned. Very important, especially in a Jewish context. And even a horoscope, which has the order of the signs a little bit differently. There were also everyday matters, or everyday documents, more from other places besides Qumran, but such things as land deeds, letters, marriage contracts, divorce contracts, bills of sale, all those kinds of things that you'd expect in a community or in a civilization. Now, one of the most common questions that I get asked is, what languages were used to write the Dead Sea Scrolls? And not everyone answers that the same. Millock, for example, in his book, which was first written in French in 1957, says there are 8 languages in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, he should know better than anybody, because he put more scrolls together than any other human being since. But generally we say mostly Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, a few Latin, from Masada mostly, and then Nabatean and Arabic from a later site. But mainly Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. Now this is the big question. Why are the Dead Sea Scrolls so important? What's all the fuss about? I mean, we could ask ourselves also, why did 1,000 of you come tonight? What maybe curiosity about Mark Lanier's buildings here. But yeah, what is so important? Well, I have a copy of the letter, and I published it in my book. It's been published elsewhere, that Professor Albright of Johns Hopkins University wrote back to John Trevor in March of 1948 after seeing the first photographs of the scroll sent to the United States, in which he says this discovery he considers the most important manuscript discovery of the 20th century. Sometimes it's been misquoted, but the most important manuscript discovery. Why? Well, the first and main reason, the thing that Albright saw right from the beginning, the thing that Trevor and Brownlee, who did the first photographs on the night of February 19th and the day of February 20th, 1948, was that these were the oldest copies of the Hebrew Bible. That was the main thing. Now, why is it important to have these old copies? Well, it's sort of like this. And think of this now when you get over to the library, if you go there and look at this scroll of Isaiah that's 24 feet long. Okay, when you look at that, ask yourself this question. How did we get from the 7th century BC and a scroll from about the 1st century BC of Isaiah to the book of Isaiah that we have in our hands tomorrow when we take our Bibles and we go to church? How did that happen? Well, you see, the Dead Sea Scrolls give us some answers about at least how well that happened. Because what we have, say in that book of Isaiah, represented by this facsimile, is like a snapshot that was taken of the text of the Hebrew Bible 2,000 years ago and then just buried. Nobody could touch it. Nobody could change it. And we know exactly what the text of the Hebrew Bible was like for the scribe that copied that, made that copy, say around 100 BC. Or think of it another way. And this really hit me one time years and years ago when I was going through the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, where they have a facsimile of the Isaiah scroll. And as I was taking some friends walking around it, I thought of the incident in the New Testament when, and you'll recall this, when Jesus stands up in the synagogue and he reads from the prophet Isaiah. And as I was standing there looking at that facsimile, I thought, well, now suppose, we had a way of testing for DNA from fingerprints on the real thing that is in the vault just across from the entrance there to the Shrine of the Book. Now, I'm not saying that scroll in the vault is the actual one that Jesus held in the synagogue. But think of this from the standpoint of chronology and geography. It's possible that it was the one. It's possible that if we had a way of detecting the fingerprints and the DNA on that scroll, that it could be connected with Jesus. Now, I'm not saying it is, but that will help you understand why there has been so much excitement about the Dead Sea Scrolls. It connects us back so far. And it shows us the degree to which the transmission of the text was protected, I would say, divinely protected over the centuries, so that what we have today in our Hebrew Bibles is not 100% exactly what the text was generally in Jesus' day. It's a rather complicated question. But when you stand back and look at it, what you conclude is that the text was transmitted very, very faithfully. And that's why the Dead Sea Scrolls are so important. Now, also they help us with linguistic, cultural, religious, geographical, all kinds of other matters in background for the New Testament, and also Jewish literature from that period. I was talking with one of my esteemed colleagues here over dinner, and he said, you know, why is it over 60 years since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered that their impact still hasn't been felt, especially in New Testament studies? You know, why are New Testament scholars still talking about Aramaic as a background to the only Semitic background to the Gospels? You know, where has the message gotten lost? Well, the scrolls give a tremendous amount of linguistic background to the study of the New Testament, and one of my missions in life is to carry that message to people. Or, as I like to put it, if you want to understand the New Testament, but especially the Gospels, you've got to put Jewish glasses on. You have to put Jewish glasses on. And how do you do that? How do you jump back in time? One of the ways is with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, enough said about that, but I hope that you'll take that to heart, because that can make a big difference. Now we're going to jump from what the scrolls are, and we only talked a little bit about how they were discovered. And I want to get back to the that we started with. How is it that so many fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls have showed up on the market in the last 8 years? It all started in 2002. As a matter of fact, I know exactly the date that it all started, because out of the blue, about 6 weeks ago, somebody sent me scans. I have no idea. I know who sent them to me, but I don't know where he got them. Sent me scans of all kinds of faxes from 2002, 2003 that went between the Kondo family and antiquities dealers in California, just out of the blue. All these private faxes about fragments and prices and where the exchange could be made and all these things, you know. And at first I thought, oh man, this is really going to be good for the next volume, you know. And then I thought, oh, but you know, William Kondo's a friend of mine, so that wouldn't be very nice. So I printed all those up, and then when I got to Jerusalem last Tuesday, I took them in, I laid them on his counter, and I said, William, you know, I don't know where these came from. Somebody's been tapping your fax line, or somebody broke in the office or something. But here they are. I know who sent them to me. I don't know where he got them. And it's up to you, you know, can I use them? And so he and his son Khalil looked through them, and they said, it's okay. It's, you know, it's been 9 years. So that's fine. It's kind of an old story. But anyway, that's when it started. And it's continuing right up to today. If you want William Kondo's telephone number, I'll be glad to give it to you. If you want to sell his home or his office, I got it. And if you're in the market for Dead Sea Scrolls, I guarantee you, you can call him up tonight. You can call him up tonight. It's about 4 o'clock in the morning, actually, in Jerusalem at the moment. And you can offer him, say, $1 million for whatever he might have for $1 million. And you can make a purchase of Dead Sea Scrolls tonight, if you want. That's how immediate it is. I know of 7 pieces right now on offer to a buyer that doesn't live very far from here. I know of a fragment that was just published or purchased about 3 months ago by a couple that lives in Houston, not the Lanier's, but another couple, for an institution. This is happening right now. Well, how did it come to that? Let's think back about how the original scrolls came in, and then we'll be able to understand what's happened here in the last few months and years. Now, when the Bedouin first found the scrolls, it didn't take them long to get kind of hooked up, mainly, but not solely, with a dealer who was Khalil Iskander Shaheen, now known as Kondo. Iskander, by the way, is the Arabic way of saying Alexander. And his father had been a cobbler. He was not a cobbler, is sometimes thought. But he was a dealer, and he was Syrian Orthodox, very important, that he was a Christian Arab. And eventually, he showed some of these to his Archbishop Samuel of St. Mark's Monastery in the Old City. Now, today, William Kondo is the son of the elder Kondo you just saw. He's in the middle of this picture. On the left is my wife, Diane, and on the right is the next generation, Khalil Kondo, who is named after his grandfather, as they do in their family. These two are the ones who are selling all the Dead Sea Scrolls in the world. They've been responsible for any Dead Sea Scrolls fragment that is legitimate, that has been sold in the last 10 years, or actually in the last 50 or 60 years, the family has been responsible. Now, on the Israeli side, just a little bit before Kondo got into the picture, well, no, not before Kondo got into the picture, before, I would say, Trevor and Brownlee got into the picture. On the Israeli side, in 1947, Professor Sekinik, the father of a very famous archaeologist, later on, Yigael Yadin, Sekinik, professor at Hebrew University, as I said, got a hold of some scrolls. He actually saw most of the original scrolls, but he couldn't come up with the money in time to get most of them. But he was able to get a couple. By the way, two of those that Sekinik was able to buy in 1947 are going to be on display in Fort Worth beginning July 2012 at a Dead Sea Scrolls exhibit that we're going to have there at the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. So you'll actually get to see the real ones that Sekinik bought. On the other side of the city, divided at that time, not as divided as it became later, the scrolls came in through Kondo and some of his friends to the man in the middle there, the Archbishop Samuel. Trevor on the right was the one who did the photography. Father Boutros on the left was sort of the helper of the Archbishop. Now, I found these scrolls, and it was some months before the officials found out about it. The officials were Lancaster Harding, Gerald Lancaster Harding, who became director of the Department of Antiquities in Jordan, because East Jerusalem was Jordan at the time, and Father Roland DeVoe, who was at the École Biblique and was in charge of lots of things. He became the director of the dig at Qumran. He was director of the school at the French School of Archaeology. He was prior of the monastery. He was president of the board of trustees for the Palestine Archaeological Museum, and became editor-in-chief of the published Dead Sea Scrolls. So he was very influential. And it was some months before they discovered that the Bedouin had found the scrolls in Cave 1. And here they are pictured going to Cave 1, looking through the dirt, trying to find if there are any more fragments. They did find fragments from about 70 different scrolls originally. This is DeVoe again. And they discovered, of course, that the Bedouin were looking all over once they found that scrolls were worth something. Now, problems started coming up. And this is a problem that relates directly to why we have scrolls in Zurich tonight. Because what the Bedouin were doing and what Kondo was doing was strictly illegal. It was strictly illegal. And they could have been put in jail for it. either under the British law or later on under Jordanian law. But there was a kind of a confluence of a couple of events that led to a solution that today probably wouldn't be considered ideal, but was a great solution for the time. First of all, as more fragments came in, the archaeologists realized that they had made a mistake in deciding to pay by the piece for the scrolls. We have a big scroll, you're being paid by the piece. Doesn't take a genius, does it? You make lots of small pieces. That was the first thing. The second thing was that the Bedouin were so afraid of being arrested that they were hiding fragments of scrolls in places on our body we don't normally talk about. Okay? So they had to find a solution. Now the solution they came up with was this. Called in Kondo, they called in the Bedouin, and they said, you really have two choices. We can put you in jail, or you can agree that every time you are out digging illegally and you find something, you bring it into the museum, and we won't arrest you. But you have to give us first chance for buying this stuff. Okay? If we can't buy it because we don't have the money, or if we don't want to buy it, then you're free to do whatever you want with it. That was the deal. And that's what I call, in my book, the Harding-DeVoe plan. It was very pragmatic. It probably wouldn't meet the approval of a lot of people today, but that's the way that the Dead Sea Scrolls were saved. You see? Now, it worked really well. What we found out in the last few years is that it didn't work as well as we thought it worked, because not everything was brought in. But most things were brought in, and that's how most of the Dead Sea Scrolls were saved. The only thing was that this was a very expensive proposition. And you can see here, this is just one cache of Cave 4 fragments that came in. This is Yusuf Saad, who was then curator of the Palestine Archaeological Museum, and whom I knew when I went to Jerusalem on my sabbatical in 1981-82. He was the accountant at the institution where I was living, to whom I paid the rent every month. The problem was I didn't know who he was at the time. You see, I hadn't gotten into the scrolls. But anyway, Yusuf Saad, there's just part of the cache that was brought in one time for Cave 4 things. And this is a couple of the original discoverers of the scrolls, probably. And this is the Palestine Museum, now called the Rockefeller Museum, where these fragments were being brought in. So imagine the situation. 1951, Wadi Murbat is discovered, a lot of stuff, and it takes a lot of money to get it. 1952, Cave 4 is discovered, huge amounts of material. Almost half, more than half, of all the fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it wasn't long before they ran out of money. So, the next question was, when Kondo brought something to the Palestine Museum and they didn't have any money, even if they wanted to buy it, what was going to happen? Well, a few solutions were found. One solution was to take money from certain institutions and then buy them, and then they promised the institutions that once they studied the scrolls, they would send them. That was allowed to go on for a few years and was cut off by the Jordanians. There was always a possibility of donors. And of course, people think that Dead Sea Scrolls is so interesting. Money will just rain down from heaven, to help buy them or publish them. And it's exactly the opposite. There aren't too many people that are actually willing to buy and also publish. So it turned out that by the time Cave 11 came along in 1956, two things had happened. The Palestine Museum was totally broke. They had even spent their endowment, and at one point they didn't have money even to pay the heating bill or the staff. That was the low point. The other thing that happened was that Kondo himself was broke. By the time the things came in from Cave 11, he didn't have enough money to buy what the Bedouin now wanted for these larger manuscripts that were discovered in Cave 11, namely Psalms, the Targum of Job, Paleo-Leviticus, a really nice piece. And let me show you these. There's Cave 11 Psalms. Beautiful. Someone asked me a question about that manuscript earlier tonight. It doesn't really show how big and beautiful that Cave 11 temple scroll is. And this is a new siglum here that I invented. 4QSWBTS Psalms. Anybody figure that out? Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. 4Q, of course, is K4 at Qumran. That's one of the pieces that is now in Fort Worth. A little bit more about that in just a moment. And there's the beautiful Paleo-Leviticus, probably my favorite scroll from the standpoint of looks. And guess what? One piece of that is now in Texas. Just something recent. Now, in this whole story, there was a lady named Elizabeth Hay Bechtel. She and her husband started donating money very early to the Dead Sea Scrolls through ASOR, the American Schools of Oriental Research, as early as 1952. And she continued to donate money, and she also paid for the Psalm Scroll from Cave 11. Now here was a situation where Kondo was broke, Palestine Museum was broke, and they found these big pieces from Cave 11, and Kondo couldn't buy them from the Bedouin. He was able to get a hold of Psalms and Paleo-Leviticus and Targum of Job because they're smaller, but the temple scroll he couldn't touch. So he thought about it, and now I'm going by the family tradition that has been told to me by William, and he came up with a solution, okay? His solution was to go to a cousin of his who was living in Germany and borrow some money. But of course, if he's going to borrow money, he had to give collateral. And he had a big piece of Genesis from Cave 4, 3 columns, 22 lines to the column, Genesis 37, that he had not sold to the Palestine Archaeological Museum. Now, we don't know whether he ever offered it, but for some reason, he still had it. So he sent this off to his cousin in Germany. The normal route was Jerusalem, Beirut, Cyprus, Zurich, and then wherever in Europe after that. And so the cousin kept this collateral. Eventually, some years later, after the Israelis invaded the West Bank and took it over in 1967, including Bethlehem and East Jerusalem, Six-Day War. Some of us are old enough to remember the Six-Day War. Kondo still had this temple scroll in his house. And he had never sold it to the Palestine Museum. And Yadin knew about that. Yadin was by now no longer a general, but he had, of course, influence in the Israeli army. So they put together a team of 4 Mossad members, 12 soldiers, and they went straight to Kondo's house, and they took the temple scroll. He eventually was paid $110,000 for that. But when he got the $110,000, he thought, well, why should I pay back my cousin? He has a scroll. I've got the cash. At that point, the Genesis piece, I figure by prices at the time, was probably worth about $20,000 or $30,000. So he just left that piece with the cousin in Germany. And eventually it made its way to the vault, and that's where it's been since 1965 or 1966. Now, what about all the other pieces? What about these 50 fragments that have been sold in the last few years, and all the ones that are yet to be sold? Well, part of the story is a man named Dijani, who came from an Arab family from Jericho. The family is still well known. Actually, Diane buys for exhibits from a branch of the Dijani family in Amman, Jordan. And he was director of the Department of Antiquities of Jordan in 1967 during the Six-Day War. Just before that, he had made an arrangement with Kondo secretly to go to London in 1966 to negotiate with Yigael Yadin to try to buy the temple scroll, which was at that time in Kondo's house. The asking price was $1 million. Of course, Yadid wanted it, but he couldn't come up with $1 million. And there he is. That answers the question that I always ask: how did Yadin know to send the soldiers in Mossad to the Kondo home in June of 1967? It's because he had been secretly negotiating for it in London. So, you know, in a way, you see, they sort of shot themselves in the foot. They shouldn't have told Yadin where it was. But anyway, and the temple scroll, of course, today is in the shrine of the book. Now, part of this story, and then we'll end by talking about how these fragments got to Zurich and were sold. Part of this story that is not well known has to do with something that we would know if we thought about it, but most of us haven't thought about it. And that is, how did Kondo know what he had if he doesn't read Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek? You know, how did he know what he had? Well, there's two of the answers right there in that picture. Starkey and Millick were the two that read every fragment that came in. In the last 30 years, the person that's been reading every fragment that he's been dealing with is Emil Puesch at the École Biblique. All three were very discreet, and so they could be trusted. Starkey and Millick went to their graves not ever having mentioned all the things that they knew about, including the fragments that have been in Zurich all these years. So there they are. The person standing is Frank Cross. He didn't help out too much on that, simply because he wasn't in Jerusalem. And again, one way or the other, these things were happening at the Palestine Archaeological Museum, or what is known as Rockefeller. Now, back to the temple scroll. So we're in 1966. The negotiations in London failed. Mrs. Bechtel had offered $1 million, but then withdrawn it, and for the temple scroll. And there was going to be one more attempt. Frank Cross at Harvard had gotten a donor. In March of 1966, he got on a plane, went to Beirut. He had an appointment with the elder Kondo to meet him at night, after dark, under a bridge in Beirut, and he was going to look at the temple scroll to see if he could buy it. Okay? All sounds very mysterious. Okay? And now I'm telling a story as Frank Cross told it to me. He's also written it up. So he came in, found the bridge, was dark, found Mr. Kondo in his car, knocked on the window, he opened it, and he didn't have the temple scroll with him. But he did have a large box of fragments. Okay? Now, Frank Cross looked through those, And a few years ago, he said to me, you know, when I looked through that box of fragments, I saw things that I never saw again, which means they never came again into the museum. They weren't part of any future sale, at least things that Frank Cross had seen. So a few months ago, when one of the fragments that the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary bought was a Psalms fragment, I got to thinking that maybe that was the Psalms fragment that Frank Cross mentioned to me that he had seen under the bridge that night and had never shown up again. So last Tuesday when I was in Jerusalem, I said to William, and I told him this story again, just to remind him, and I said, William, is it possible that the fragment that Southwestern Seminary just bought was in that box that your dad showed to Frank Cross in March of 1966 under that bridge in Beirut? And he said, yes, it's possible. So that gives you a clue sort of to the root of a lot of these fragments, probably from Beirut to Cyprus to Zurich, probably in 1966, just before the Six-Day War, and we don't have any idea how many there are. They're still there. So talk to your friends. We need to buy these. I'm talking to some of my friends. But that's the situation we have now, and we know how it came about, that big piece of Genesis is still there. We know how it happened. And we also know that it'll take $42 million to buy it. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed thinking with me a little bit about scrolls tonight. There are all kinds of aspects. I could have done, something on the content of some scroll, but this is up to date. This is what's happening now. This is what I'll be making phone calls about tomorrow. And you'll be hearing about more scrolls, and we'll have an exhibit in a few months in Fort Worth that will have some of these fragments that we've been talking about. Thank you so much for your patience. You've been a great audience, and I hope we get to see each other again.
I want to make sure I was clear on something. I was already handed one question coming up here. Skeptics and critics say that the transmission process, handwriting, over days, weeks, months, years, centuries, thousand, millennium, handwriting transmission process means we have an unreliable Hebrew Bible today. Do the scrolls prove the opposite?
Yes, that's a simple answer.
That's a simple answer, yeah. Huh? How so? Would you explain us, please?
Well, of course, anything copied by hand is going to have variants from any other thing copied by hand. If each one of us set out, now wouldn't this be a project? If each one of us set out to copy the entire Bible by hand, we would have as many copies, different copies in some small ways, eventually, as we have people here tonight. That's just the way it is. But, and there is, of course, the matter of text types that grow up over a long period of time, either geographical text types or ideological text types and other text types. But if you measure the differences, the textual variance, in terms of the percentage of the text or the importance of the variance for the meaning of the text, the variants amount to nothing. No ancient text, I think, can claim to be copied as well and as faithfully as the Hebrew Old Testament. I realize it's a bit simplified, but then, we don't have a semester to get into textual criticism here, so.
Well, so for example, when you say that there will be minor differences, are you referring to spelling mistakes? Are you referring to changing word order, things of that nature? Or do we have huge theological problems in the scripture?
No, we don't have huge theological problems. Of course, those aren't the only choices. Now, we do have orthographic differences, that's differences in spelling. well, just like we do between England and here. There are some grammatical differences. There are corrections. I mean, if you take a look at the Isaiah scroll there in your case in your library, you'll see corrections between the lines here and there. But they amount to nothing, really, for the meaning.
Okay, a couple other things. If the Isaiah scroll is so old, why hasn't it disintegrated?
That's actually a very good question, because before the scrolls were found, one of the things that students were taught was that it would have been impossible for a document to have survived 2,000 years, at least in Palestine and Israel, that part of the world. Certainly in Egypt, we know that they did. And that's the excuse, and I think it's a reason, not an excuse, that Father van der Ploeg gave to us when we interviewed him. See, he was the first non-Arab to see the Dead Sea Scrolls in summer of 1947. And he didn't recognize their age. And he said to me, he was over 90 now when we were talking to him, he said, look, I was taught as a student that they couldn't last, okay? But the fact is that they did in a very dry environment, like the environment around the Dead Sea, in caves there. And, you know, they survived to a greater or lesser extent. They did better inside jars, but not perfectly.
How do they know these scrolls are authentic? Are there any counterfeits going around? And how do they know when the scrolls were written?
Okay, authentic are there counterfeits and the date. Okay, well, authentic should be that they come from the time and the place that they claim to come from. I don't think that that's ever been too much of a problem with Dead Sea Scrolls, but there have been attempts at counterfeiting some from the beginning. I mean, DeVoe talks about this in his introduction to volume 2, I believe it is, in DJD, Discoveries in the Judean Desert, where an Arab had brought him what was obviously a counterfeit. I, at one time, was offered, back in the 90s, I was offered a piece of leather which had some writing on it by a Bedouin, and I knew it was fake, but like DeVoe sometimes did, I bought it anyway, because I knew that I would be offered something again, and I wanted at least to be offered. So sometimes there were fakes, not too often. How are things authenticated today? Basically, if the Kondo family says, this comes from Cave 4, that's about the best you can do for provenance. That is where it came from. That's just the way it's been from the beginning. How do we date it? At first it was paleographically, that is, there's a kind of typology of how handwriting changed over the centuries, and it was possible to use a system that was largely developed by Frank Cross at Harvard to date within 25 years or 50 years, something like that. Beginning in 1950, radiocarbon 14 dating was done, first on the linen covering of the Isaiah scroll, later on scrolls themselves. And the paleographic dates have been pretty well substantiated. You can date within to, one half-life, or, well, less than that. But you can date to within, say, 150 to 250 years, so you can get pretty close. And
okay, rapid fire question answer.
Okay.
Ready? This is the money round.
Okay.
What seminary would you recommend for the highest current Hebrew scholarship on Dead Sea Scrolls studies?
Well, we Trinity Seminary in Chicago has a couple of good people. Trinity University in Vancouver has a couple of good people. Probably the most prominent ones in the United States today.
Okay. If you were purchasing a Dead Sea Scroll fragment, how do you know if you're getting part of an Old Testament book or a divorce proceeding?
Well, it depends on if you get a fragment of Leviticus, you might have to,
It could be both. Well played, Weston, well played. Is anybody out there looking for these things now? Any Bedouins, anybody else looking for additionals?
Absolutely, yeah. Probably more than we know. But yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of money involved.
Is the story true about the Arabs chunking a rock and hitting a jar?
Well, it's been repeated a lot, and that part of the story is probably one of the most certain parts of the story.
Can you respond to the claims made concerning the Copper Scroll and the alleged mushroom cult?
Probably we shouldn't take that whole idea seriously, though Mrs. Allegro, whose husband John Allegro wrote about that, always claimed that John had been misquoted, misunderstood, and he never, intended to be understood the way that he was. But no, that's all pretty much nonsense.
Okay. Although if you want to know about opium and the jars in the library, you can talk to Tim Harrison. He's got the latest story on that. The opium dealers 1000 BC. I learned about that tonight. What is your opinion of the Gabriel revelation, a Dead Sea Scroll on stone found in Jordan?
Okay, that's owned by David Jesselson. That was first displayed here in Houston. About 3 years ago, first place in the world that it was displayed. I think personally that it's authentic in the sense that it comes from about the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls and about the place, but it was found on the other side in Jordan. As far as the content of the inscription, it's interesting, but it's not earth-shaking.
You mentioned that the Aramaic foundation for the New Testament is still discussed to the chagrin of others. Could you speak to the linguistic evidence for your own conclusion about this?
In my opinion, after many years of studying scroll scholars, as I said, the greatest Dead Sea Scrolls scholar until now was Joseph Millick. Lots of reasons for that. He already recognized by 1957 that the scrolls changed the whole landscape about what languages were spoken and how they were spoken and how they were used at the time of Jesus. He concluded, and I would conclude along with him, that Hebrew was much more important, was in fact the language of the common people, and is much more important as a substratum layer for the New Testament Greek. I agree with him.
Okay, I get to throw in my own question. If y'all don't throw rocks at me, sorry, but this is one I want to ask for everybody. When my first year or two I studied Hebrew, I had a Jewish Hebrew professor from South Africa. And whenever we came across the name of God, Jehovah, Yahweh, whatever you want to call it, but the name of God, he would not allow us to pronounce it. He said to pronounce the name of God is blasphemy. And so he said, whenever we come across the name, we should either say Adonai, my Lord, or we should say Hashem, which is Hebrew for the name. We were not allowed to pronounce it, not allowed to read it. Blasphemy to do so. In the New Testament, there seems to be an indication, at least in the Gospel of John, that when Jesus was asked why he could be talking about Abraham, and he said, before Abraham was, I am, perhaps Jesus actually spoke that name, which is why they picked up rocks to stone him. The question I have for you is this: is there an indication within the Dead Sea Scrolls that going back even to before the time of Jesus, there was a special reverence given to the name of God so that Yahweh is shown in the scrolls to be something special that's not written normally or not pronounced normally or anything like something like that? Is there some indication?
Yeah, there are two ways that they indicate it, at least two in the scrolls. And you can see both of those in the facsimiles that you have in the library. In the Pesher HaKavakuk, the way that they did that was to use a different alphabet when they came to Yud He Vav He, which is like YHWH, the abbreviation for the name of Yahweh, or if you mispronounce it, Jehovah. Okay? Well, the thing is, I wasn't really being facetious. Jehovah, which we're all used to, consists of the vowels of one word, Adonai, put underneath, as they put vowels in Hebrew, the consonants of another word. It was itself a way of making it unpronounceable. But that was later on. Okay, so in Habakkuk Pressure, you have a different alphabet used, Paleo-Hebrew alphabet.
Which is Paleo-Hebrew, for those who don't know, that's like...
Old-time Hebrew.
Yeah, 7th, 8th century BC.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, it's actually before the Babylonian captivity, so before 587. And then after that, it was used in kind of an archaizing fashion. Okay? Second way is on Testimonia, which you also have a facsimile of. This is a combination of 4 different quotations, which are messianic passages used by the people at Qumran for, to describe the coming Messiah. And in that, instead of writing the Yud He Vav He, YHWH, they put 4 dots. So you can take a look at that in the library. You can see 4 dots, and that's another indication that you're not supposed to pronounce the word.
Was Elizabeth Hay Bechtel a member of the family that was into major engineering and construction? The
Absolutely. Her husband was one of the brothers. His heyday was, I would say, in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Her husband had quite a bit to do with the Hoover Dam. And the Bechtel Company, of course, is still famous today. Yes.
Okay. All right, last question. We had about 25 cards on give us something about these lead tablets. So recognizing that we've really abused these folks. Oh, that's him. That's the Israeli Bedouin. He's got the, and you have his cell number for us.
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay, you look asleep. He looks, who's this?
This is Bar Oz Sasson, who is an Israeli attorney from Haifa. And when Diane and I showed up at Hassan's house, this is inside his home, the attorney was there.
So, now why do I not find that surprising?
So I thought, well, in a way, it was good because I thought, well, they're serious. I mean, if you're just dealing with fakes, then, why would you bring your...
Do you tell us what you know about whether or not they're real? Should we just be ignoring this stuff or should we be paying attention?
Yeah, okay. Well, and I haven't even told you this part, Mark. I first heard about this almost 2 years ago. I was in South Africa again writing. I got this call from a guy in England, and he said, I'm so-and-so, David Elkington. Didn't know him at the time, and he said, I know a Bedouin who has dug up some things in Jordan and brought them over to Israel, and I'm wondering if you can tell me what to do. And I said, well, first of all, in my position, where I work with the Jordanian government and the Israeli government all the time, I have to be very careful and very neutral. And my advice is, take them back to Jordan and give them to the Department of Antiquities. It's as simple as that. So I didn't hear from him for 2 years until a couple of weeks ago when all this started in a newspaper. And I was called by the Department of Antiquities in Jordan. And the director, whose name is Ziad Al-Sad, said, Prince Hassan and I would like you to do us a favor. Please, when you go to Israel in a few days, try to meet with this Hassan. So I traced down his number through some friends in England, called him, we went to see him. He sure thinks they're, real, I think. But an archaeological object, I think there's a few short things to remember. First of all, provenance. Where did it come from? Now, if you didn't have an archaeologist there, if you don't have photographs, if you don't have witnesses, then you've got a problem with provenance, okay? Secondly, date. Now, in the case of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are mostly written on vegetable or animal material, either papyrus or parchment or leather, then you have something you can date at least, pretty well. In the case of lead, it's much harder, but he showed me a report that was made by a professor at Oxford University and also in Zurich, detailing the chemical composition of the lead codices, which they say puts the lead, first of all, in the Mediterranean area, and secondly, during Roman times. But that's pretty broad, okay? But still, you've got like an attempt at a date. Thirdly, when you're dealing with something like this, you need to talk about content. So far, only 3 of 70 tablets has even been opened. There are 3 in the UK. Hassan told me that the rest of them are buried, and the way he said it sounded like they're buried, in his backyard or somewhere. although, when he went to get these documents, he had them hidden in the ceiling. So he stood in the chair, and what a hiding place, huh? You open it up right in front of your guests. So who knows where he has these things buried, okay? So my report to the Jordanians was this. Right now, they have no value whatsoever because you don't have provenance, you don't have date, you don't know the content, and it's foolish to make a judgment either way. It was foolish of one of the officials there to say, this may be greater than the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. Even if they're full of things, even if they're from the 1st century, they're not going to be greater than Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay? And I explained to Ziad and Bar Oz that if eventually they could somehow prove that it's some kind of a Christian content and they're from the 3rd or 4th century, they're not going to be worth much anyway, because we know a lot about Christianity from that period. If they're from the 1st century, they're really Christian. There really was a good content. If they could somehow prove what cave they came out of, if they could, all that, then you might be talking about something that's valuable, both in terms of money and in terms of content for the scholarly world. But we're not there yet. We're a long ways away. And so Hassan's invited me back. He's a nice guy. I'll go see him. And maybe, who knows, maybe he's dug up the plates.
And maybe this time you take your lawyer.
Take my what?
Your lawyer.
Oh, yeah. Who do you, right?
Okay, will y'all join me in thanking Weston very much?
Well,